Recently, as we all know, Britain's domestic intelligence agency, the MI5, admitted that it's tracking some 200 Islamist cells with over 1,600 members who are actively engaged in plotting or facilitating terrorist attacks in the UK and overseas. 14,000 British Muslims are considered to be potential terrorists by MI5. According to the UK government statistics, and these usually weigh in on the side of being conservative, there are 1 million Muslims in London, 50% of them under the age of 25. In a Times of London poll conducted this past July, and that's 1 year since the London tube bombings, 2%, or 20,000, stated that they would be proud if a family member joined Al-Qaeda. 16%, 160,000, said they would be indifferent. According to another poll, 60% of British Muslims want to live under Sharia law in the UK. 20% admitted that they felt sympathy for the London tube bombers. Ironically, 4 days after the London attacks, the House of Commons passed a religious hate law aimed at protecting Muslims. They were under a lot of pressure from Islamic organizations to do something to protect Muslims who perceived a greater threat to themselves since 9/11. Well, here today to tell us about the fifth column in Britain and how they're advancing the global jihad and threatening the once special relationship between the UK and America is Melanie Phillips.
I'm happy to say that I think I'm in the running for this year's awards, and I'm really holding my breath. I'm going to speak to you today about Britain. Britain is basically caught in a pincer movement between the two arms of the global jihad, the terrorist arm and the cultural arm. Britain is only now, even after 9/11, even after the 7/7 bombings in July 2005, only now slowly actually waking up to the fact that it has a terrorist threat of the scale and nature that it does, but it is still in a state of confusion over the cultural threat. You may have read or heard of our debate recently in Britain over the niqab, the wearing of the full-face veil by Muslim women. And the remarkable thing about this debate was that it occurred at all, and that it occurred with such ferocity and passion. It was as if a dam had burst, because for all these years, Britons have been told that they cannot discuss Islamic practices and criticize them for fear of being labeled Islamophobic, prejudiced against religion. So that was a good development. I had some queries myself about precisely how that debate was conducted, but basically the fact the debate was held was a very positive development. On the other hand, we also had very recently the trial of Nick Griffin, who is the leader of Britain's most racist and nearest thing we have to a neo-fascist party, the British National Party. Griffin was not on trial for his fascist ideas. He was on trial for inciting racial hatred by saying Islam was a wicked religion. Some conceptual confusion there. The jury didn't buy it. The jury will have no truck with people being prosecuted for saying Islam is a wicked religion, because the jury probably agrees with this. So the jury slung out the prosecution, and Griffin was acquitted. The disturbing thing was, not only this prosecution was brought, but the disturbing thing was that our current Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, who is the man most likely to succeed Tony Blair as Prime Minister, as leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister, said that he proposed to strengthen the law to make sure that anyone who said Islam was a religion, was a wicked religion, would be prosecuted successfully and convicted. In other words, reviving this great debate which Janet's referred to that we had about criminalising the incitement to religious hatred, which basically boils down to saying that if somebody like me says that there is such a thing as Islamic terrorism, I can be called I can be accused of inciting religious hatred. So this is troubling, to put it mildly, and it means that we still have a climate of denial. This is Britain, where in the 1990s, as remarkable as this may seem, Britain became the most significant hub for al-Qaeda terror in Europe, mainly because of its state of denial about the Islamist threat. Well, we now accept that there is an Islamic threat, as we've heard from Janet, these terrifying figures about the numbers who are currently under suspicion in Britain's 2 million strong or so Muslim community out of a population, to put it in context, of some 60 million souls. So we accept in Britain that there is a terrorist threat of considerable size. We won't accept, however, what the cause is. We find all sorts of excuses still for the cause of the fact that we have all these young Muslims who are born and bred in Britain but are turning into people who wish to murder large numbers of their fellow British citizens. And we say the reason for that is because of Islamophobia. The reason for that is because of discrimination. The reason for that is because of poverty. The reason for that is because, above all, we have supported America in the war in Iraq. What we won't accept is that this is, which I think is personally demonstrably true, we are in the throes of a global religious war designed to Islamicize those parts of the world which are not already Islamic. We don't realize in Britain that our British Muslims have been radicalized by British institutions set up by the Muslim community as far back as the 1980s. These institutions were set up by people who had come in from Pakistan. We didn't realize that Pakistan had already been radicalized to the jihad by Saudi Wahhabism. Therefore, these institutions, these Muslim institutions, educational institutions, cultural institutions set up in the 1980s were actually preaching Wahhabism, were preaching hatred of the West, and a whole generation and subsequent generations of young Muslims have been born and bred into this society which has radicalized them to hatred of the West. We don't realize in Britain the scale of the Muslim Brotherhood program to Islamize Europe. We think we have no idea. There's virtually no discussion of this whatsoever. People in Britain are almost entirely unaware, for example, that in 1978 the Organization of the Islamic Conference in London decided to set up institutions in Britain financed by Muslim states around the world to lobby for recognition of Islam as a separate religious entity, in other words, Sharia law, and this was one step towards the full politicized, towards the full political program of the Islamization of Britain. We think in Britain that the problem is that our Muslims don't feel properly British. Have we got this wrong? They feel so British, they really do feel British. They feel so British, they think that Britain should become Islamic. That is the problem, and we simply have got this the wrong way around. And that is because in Britain we are incapable of seeing the world through anything other than our own eyes. It is an example of liberal hubris. We can only see the world through the liberal prism. We cannot see the world through the prism of people who really do not come from that tradition whatsoever. We cannot understand in Britain the perspective of people whose worldview is answerable not to reason, not to the rule of facts, but to irrationality, prejudice and bigotry.